In 1998, Raccoon City was destroyed by a nuclear missile. For 28 years, the Resident Evil franchise moved on, giving us stories from different cities, areas, and even different countries, but never Raccoon City again. But with Resident Evil Requiem, we finally went back to Raccoon City, one of the most infamous locations in horror gaming history. We went back to where everything started for Leon Kennedy, but the journey of this game wasn't easy. The game got reworked mid-development, delayed multiple times, and almost became an online multiplayer game before Capcom realized that's not something the fans wanted. This is the story behind Resident Evil 9. Let's go back in time to June 6, 2025, to the Summer Game Fest that was held in Los Angeles. Resident Evil fans were hoping to get some news from Capcom about Resident Evil 9. The last mainline game in the series was Resident Evil Village, which released back in 2021, 4 years without any news or updates about the next entry. Of course, it didn't feel that long because we had the big Resident Evil 3 remake in 2023, but still it was a remake, not a mainline entry, so fans were eager to know what was next for the series. Halfway through the show, Maggie Robertson, who voiced the famous Lady Demetrius from Resident Evil Village, appeared on screen to celebrate the upcoming 30 years anniversary of the franchise. After that, executive producer Jun Takeuchi took the stage and said this.
皆様のおかげでバイオハザードも30周年を迎えることができました。ありがとうございます。さて、お待たせしているバイオハザードの最新作なんですが、もう少しだけ、あと瞬きするぐらいの間だけお待ちいただければと思います。それでは、これからもバイオハザードシリーズよろしくお願いいたします。ありがとうございました。
Like many others, I thought that was it. I thought that was everything we were getting from them. I assumed the next game simply wasn't ready to be shown yet. But like everyone else, I was wrong. Because at the very end of Summer Game Fest, the final announcement of the entire show, Capcom dropped the bomb.
Grace Ashcroft.
Yes?
The hype was so real that within days, Resident Evil Requiem had over 1 million wishlist across all platforms. But here's the fun fact, the game almost didn't exist. According to game director Koshi Nakanishi, who also directed Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, the development of Resident Evil 9 started around 2019-2020, right after RE7 wrapped up, while Resident Evil Village was still in production. And the initial idea? An online multiplayer game. Yes, Resident Evil 9 was originally planned as a multiplayer project. In interviews with Video Games Chronicle and Bloody Disgusting, Nakanishi revealed that the initial concept for RE9 was multiplayer. However, the idea was scrapped when the project went through a reboot in 2021 in favor of creating a more traditional Resident Evil experience. The studio spent a few years developing this online concept, likely inspired by the games like Dead by Daylight, Left 4 Dead, or even their own Resident Evil Resistance. But instead of forcing it and going through with it, they realized that it's not gonna work and decided to scrap it. And honestly, that was probably the best choice. Capcom has previously experimented with online modes, but projects like Umbrella Corps or Operation Raccoon City were disasters. Even the online mode that came with Resident Evil 3 Remake ended up being a flop. After scrapping the multiplayer version, Capcom went back to the drawing board and began developing Resident Evil 9 as a traditional single-player game. For a few years, we didn't hear much information, until a PlayStation blog Japan, where Nakanishi gave an interview where he said, "Development started on a small scale 6 years ago in 2020. However, the current form that everyone has now played came together about 3 years ago. Which means the current single-player version is only about 3 years old, while the earlier years were spent working on a completely different game." During this reboot, the studio made several key decisions, one of the biggest being the return to Raccoon City. Both Resident Evil 7 and Village were praised by critics and fans, but there was also criticism that games felt somewhat disconnected from the classic Resident Evil lore. Many fans wanted the series to return to the Umbrella storyline and bring back classic characters. Nakanishi explained that Resident Evil 7 and 8 were intentionally written to feel somewhat separate from the storylines that came before Resident Evil 6. But with the next mainline title, the team wanted to reconnect with that larger narrative. During the early stages of development, Leon Kennedy was originally planned to be the main protagonist of the game. The studio wanted to bring Resident Evil back to its true horror roots, with Leon experiencing intense horror moments and jump scares. But they soon realized that it might feel strange to see someone like Leon, who has survived countless horrors throughout the entire franchise, suddenly acting scared. They also realized something important. For horror to feel effective, the character needs to react to the fear on screen, and fans don't want to see a timid Leon. They know him as this confident, experienced survivor who has faced almost everything. So the developers came up with a simple solution. Enter Grace Ashcroft, the daughter of Elisa Ashcroft from Resident Evil Outbreak. Grace is an FBI analyst investigating a series of murders at the Wynwood Hotel, the same place where her mother died 8 years earlier. Unlike Leon, Grace is an introverted character who has never experienced the horrors of the Resident Evil universe before. So the horror section originally designed for Leon were given to Grace, while Leon was moved into a secondary role with more action-focused gameplay. The return of Leon to the mainline series added even more hype to the game, since he is one of the most beloved characters in the Resident Evil universe. Well, Leon isn't young anymore. He's older, more experienced, more grizzled, and apparently now drives a Porsche. Resident Evil 7 and 8 also had another feature that made them feel different from previous games. Both games were first-person only, but with Resident Evil 9, the developers allowed players, for the first time ever, to switch between first-person and third-person perspective at any time. Even with all the reboots and changes, Resident Evil 9 still faced a few initial delays. According to a reliable Resident Evil leaker, the original multiplayer version was aiming for a 2023 release. Later, the rebooted version Requiem was targeting a 2025 before eventually being delayed to 2026. Like many major studios, Capcom also had to deal with the impact of COVID during the development. On top of that, turning a multiplayer game into a full single-player experience requires a massive amount of work. New gameplay systems, new story structures, and completely new level designs had to be created. Implementing both first-person and third-person gameplay also add extra layer of complexity. Developers had to ensure that animations, camera work, and gameplay still feel smooth regardless of which perspective the player chooses. There was another challenge as well, Nintendo's Switch 2. When development originally started, the console hadn't even been announced. According to the game's producer, the team hadn't considered Switch 2 at all in their early plans. They had to add support for the console later during development after Nintendo officially revealed it in 2025. After announcing the game in June 2025, Capcom didn't slow down. 2 months later in August, they released a playable demo at both Gamescom and PAX West. The same month, they also revealed a trailer focusing on the past of Grace Ashcroft. 1 month later, during a Nintendo Direct, Capcom announced the Switch 2 version of the game. Then at the end of the year, during the Game Awards, we got a major reveal. Leon Kennedy is a playable character in the game. And not only that, Capcom partnered with Porsche to create a custom Cayenne Turbo GT specifically for Leon's character. But as the release date approached, things got a bit messy. On February 17th, just 10 days before launch, IGN reported that some people had already obtained physical copies of the game from early retailers. Spoilers quickly began flooding the internet, revealing story details, character deaths, boss fights, everything. On February 20th, Capcom released an official statement asking people not to spread the spoilers and confirmed that they would issue takedown notices for leaked footage. Meanwhile, the original director of Resident Evil 2, legendary developer Hideki Kamiya, went nuclear on X, saying that people who spoil games from others deserve 1,000 deaths. The Resident Evil community quickly railed together, mass reporting spoilers posts to help create a spoiler-free environment for everyone. The return to Raccoon City was one of the biggest highlights of Resident Evil 9. Originally destroyed by a nuclear strike in 1998 to contain the T-virus outbreak, the city had remained a quarantine zone ever since. But with Requiem, the players finally returned to Raccoon City nearly 30 years later, around 2028. Grace Ashcroft, the FBI analyst, investigated murders at the Wynwood Hotel, the same place where her mother died 8 years earlier. Meanwhile, Leon Kennedy tracking down a former Umbrella scientist named Victor Gideon. Both investigations eventually lead them back to the ruins of Raccoon City. And with 2026 making the 30-year anniversary of Resident Evil franchise, there was no better way to celebrate than by returning to one of the most iconic locations in horror gaming history. The game launched with very positive reviews from both critics and fans. The community has embraced Grace Ashcroft as a new character, and of course fans still love the legendary Leon Kennedy. So that's the untold story of Resident Evil Requiem, a game that was rebooted, delayed and almost spoiled before release. What do you think about the game? If you have played it, whose part did you enjoy more, Grace's or Leon's? That's it for today. If you have enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, peace.